Hi, everybody. This is Kara Crossweight-Brindle, and we are on Webinar 1 of 2 when it comes to having some dynamics for the people who are taking our Save More Lives from Suicide online series or online course. So happy to have you join us. If you weren't able to join us, I hope you're getting this recording. The plan is to get it out to everyone later this afternoon. So right now, I want to start off with kind of a framework, because for those of you who know me, you know that suicide is a topic of passion. It's personal, it's professional, and for many of us, we didn't have a lot of training in suicide assessment for the mental health professional community or the other helping professions that are taking this course. So I think recognizing that pain point, there's a lot of work to be done in helping people feel more comfortable, helping them feel more competent, and helping them feel like they can handle this. Because unfortunately, suicide isn't going anywhere. It's continuing to be a part of our experience. And for so many of us as professionals, the likelihood is that 25% of us in our career will have a client die by suicide. So let's start there. Not to start off heavy, but to really start this conversation with all of you. Why do we use the term die by suicide? Well, some of you are like, I don't know. I didn't know there was a PC version to this. And death by suicide has become the new norm. The phrase that people want us to utilize, the phrase that people want us to engage in. We no longer say the word committed. And some of you have heard this because committed has its own sense of negativity, its own sense of language. And for many people that you're engaging with, the loved ones left behind, if after someone dies by suicide, this can be really painful. It has a certain level of shame, judgment to it. And so the best practice now is to allow people to speak the way they want to speak. And this is specific to the loved ones, the survivors of suicide loss, and to adopt the language they choose if you're interacting with them as a professional. But know that the best practice as a nation is to say death by suicide. It's supposed to be like death by car accident, death by heart attack. It's meant to be more neutral. It's supposed to take away that shame component or the illegal component, whether you're coming from a religious place or a community that suicide is not allowed, and really help you meet the client where they're at. Because if you're working with a survivor of loss, this can become a challenge. This can be something that they're just trying to find the language for it as well. For those of you who didn't know that committed suicide is no longer a thing, this is only about 2 years old that the national organization has tried to encourage even the media to change their language. Now we've got a ways to go because the media still likes to say the word committed. But for everyone else, death by suicide, they died by suicide, they took their own life. These are the kinds of language we want to start with as best practice. So let me know if you have questions about that. There's a great article about this on one of our colleagues' sites that we'll put on this webinar at another point. So with that being said, a lot of you have questions about how to do this, how to do a proper suicide assessment, how to help a client, how to navigate the complexities of suicide, because there's just so much we're tracking, so much that's going on. And for me, that's the passion. How do we support the clients that we are seeing in the room? In this case, you're here in my office. And how do we make sure that they feel safe enough to have this conversation? So for those of you who have started the course, I'm really excited to hear from you to see how things are going, how you're doing with the course. And for many of you, you started with the Competency Checklist, and that was intentional on my part. I found this wonderful checklist that I felt did a great job of just figuring out what your baseline is. What are you working with? What was your level of education when it came to suicide and suicide assessment? Now, this might not be a shock to some of you, but suicide assessment training is not that common. I think it's becoming more common now because so many people are experiencing this. It's coming into your offices. It's coming into your space. And yet, for me personally, there wasn't a lot of training in graduate school, which is where most of us start this educational process. And so this competency checklist was something I got really interested in because it came across our listserv for the American Association of Suicidology. So that national organization that is telling us about the latest research and the latest projects and the latest trends in suicide. So I'm going to put the screen up here so you can see this checklist with me. It might be a little grainy, but it is part of your online course. And the hope is that you took this assessment for yourself before you started with our online content, just to get a baseline of what you're working with, where you feel like your comfort level is at. And then hopefully by the end of the course, the 4 hours of time that we spend, that you will then be able to do another assessment and see how things hopefully have changed or improved. Do you feel like you have more competency now at the end of the course than before you started it? So let's go ahead and see if I can get this to show up on your screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. I'm going to minimize me for now. All right, so this is the competency form that is on the online Saving More Lives from Suicide course. What you can see here is it's meant to be utilized by you as the professional, so self-report version, and you can also have a supervisor or someone working closely with you also evaluate your competency. So it was meant to be utilized by people still in their master's or doctorate programs, and I think it can be completely relevant for those of you who do supervision around this topic. So the first thing I want to point out is that you're seeing the training. So how many years of training has this person had? So you can see this from the lens of graduate school. And you can see it from how they're interacting with their peers, but also what is their level of exposure working with a client who's expressing suicidal thoughts, ideation is the other word for it, or behaviors or experiences. So one thing to note here at the top is the subdiscipline. So we kind of see this designation, clinical, counseling, school, and other. And for many of us, this really represents what's our background. There's so many different psychology and counseling backgrounds. There's the social work, there's the counseling psychology, there's the doctorate versus master's, there's, having a certified addiction counselor designation. And so these things might matter as you kind of figure out, what was my education? Did I have an advantage of having more of a robust education on suicide, or was this not even talked about? In my experience, I can't remember a very meaningful assessment process or training. I do remember that the underlying message is, if you're afraid they're going to die, that you put them into a hospital. And I'm here to tell you that that should be the last resort and not the first. And so that's why you're here. That's why you're in this course, is you're looking for some resources, some ideas, some tools that are going to help you support your clients to the best of your ability and to keep them safe. So in this gray bar at the top, you're seeing the designation, the different levels of assessing where your competency is. So you have the one at incapable, which kind of feels like a harsh word, but I have not been trained or been unable to do this task. 2, working towards competency. 3, I'm competent. 4th, I'm advanced. And so I want to break down the questions and just talk about why I think they're showing up here. Now, before I do that, I want to honor the fact that this is courtesy of some of the researchers. This is at the footnote of your assessment tool. And Kramer, Bryson, Eckers, Keys, and Ridge, 2017, that was where I found this resource for you, this idea of having a suicide competency assessment form, as you see it here. So I want to honor that this is their work. This is their ability to explore the comfort level and competency of the mental health professionals in their graduate programs and beyond. So, number 1, know and manage your attitude and reactions towards suicide. Why would this be the first question on a self-report questionnaire? Well, for many of us, suicide has already touched our lives in some way. It might alarm you to know that 135 people at minimum are impacted by each suicide. This was data and research that was done by the American Association of Suicidology, released in fall of 2018, that at minimum, 135 people are impacted by each death by suicide. So managing your attitude and reactions towards suicide would be critical, because something that we talk about in our training is how you show up in the room. If you have an attitude, for example, that suicide is never an option, is that going to prevent you from building rapport with someone who needs it to feel like a comfort? And these might be for more specifically our chronic suicidal individuals, the people who say, I just want this as a backup option. If things don't get better, if things don't they don't improve, that I need to have this as an option. So for those of you who recognize that you might have an attitude in this flavor of, I don't think suicide should ever be an option, I think everyone should be alive, this can be a challenge because it might prevent you from connecting with the client that you're serving. Other reactions to suicide. Maybe you have a reaction of panic. So many of us do. The ALERT acronym really represents the adrenaline that shows up when a client says, I'm not okay. I'm suicidal, I have a plan, I have thoughts, whatever it may be. And so is the reaction to control? Is the reaction to avoid? I can't do this, I got to put you somewhere else, I've got to get you to the hospital. These things are things you want to know about yourself. What if you're neutral? That's not necessarily a bad thing. But what if they're looking for a particular reaction, something compassionate, something supportive, and you're going blank, that you're striving so hard to be neutral that you lose the connection, that you disconnect from the client? So these are some things, these are examples of how reactions towards suicide can show up in the room. It can be your body language. Maybe you're shutting down. Maybe you're closed off. Maybe you're really still. Can be your face. Is there a twitch, a glimmer of something, a blank face, that blank screen we try to strive for that can feel kind of cold at times? Or is it the panic and I need to do something about this? Now, the hope is with this training and other resources you're utilizing that your reaction is going to be considered more positive, that it's going to be something like leaning in, tell me more, I'm curious, I can see your pain, I can see that you're willing to talk about it, can you tell me how you got here? How did you get to this deep, dark place?